for joining me, tired and all. I guess we can do our best.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
Any thoughts before we get started?
Uh, no, I think we can jump right into it. As
Okay.
long as that's good for you.
Okay. Let's see. We got 10 seconds till scheduled time.
Oh, oh God.
Hello and welcome to Rounding the Earth. I'm your host, Matthew Crawford. And tonight we have kind of an off-schedule conversation. We've got Dan Wilson, microbiologist who goes by with Darpatize. Well, you know what? We've got Dan now.
There
Welcome
we
Dan
go.
into the studio. Got technical difficulties for a moment.
A little bit. Looks like it.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to chat smoothly from here.
Hopefully.
How are you doing?
I'm doing mostly well. How are you?
Doing well. Tell us a little bit about yourself for the Rounding the Earth audience. So you are a microbiologist,
Molecular biologist.
molecular biologist. Thank you. And where'd you do your research? What was it focused on?
I did my PhD at Carnegie Mellon University, and it was in ribosome biogenesis. The PhD was.
Okay. Um,
There we go.
so are you in like you seem young to me. Are you in the doc stage of your career?
I work in industry now. I didn't do a postdoc.
I see. Okay.
Wanted to start a family, so postdoc isn't too friendly to that lifestyle. So
What kind of work are you doing now?
I just work for a company called Eurofins, doing work in various clinical trial settings, clinical trial products.
Okay. Well, so I went over with the audience the basics behind the debate we were having
Sure.
as to
Okay.
whether or not a process that tested as a proxy for disease should need to be validated itself in order for the results to be valid. And your argument is doesn't matter.
So we're talking about COVID PCR tests during the clinical trials, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were validated. And
They
so
were
so
validated
so the
for
first thing you
the
said,
vaccinated arm.
so the first thing you
Let's be clear about that.
sorry?
They were validated for the unvaccinated arm.
They're validated to test positive for SARS-CoV-2 or not.
For people who are unvaccinated. The debate here is whether or not we know that the sensitivity and specificity will be the same for somebody who's vaccinated versus unvaccinated.
There's no reason why it wouldn't be.
Well, we don't know that unless we test, right? I mean,
Well, we do. We do.
already that argument, you're just knocking down the entire purpose of a randomized control trial, which is to
No.
see whether or not there are known or unknown confounders. The vaccine itself could be a confounder.
How?
Well, we don't have to know the mechanism.
No, how?
Well, we just know that it happens in the past. I mean, most things
How did it happen in the past?
right? Within the last decade, we learned the mechanism for aspirin.
So
Well,
how-
we used to
so
figure
so
years without knowing the mechanism.
so how did it happen in the past?
Well, we don't necessarily know.
In which situation did it happen in the past?
What happened during the Pfizer trial, for one thing,
Did it?
for N protein testing,
Did
there
it?
was confounding in the data.
How?
Well, proportion of the people who were positive for COVID, you did not have the same sensitivity and specificity as you did for the sensitivity and specificity were different between the vaccinated and unvaccinated arms for detection of the N protein.
Are you talking about the antigen tests?
Let's see. So yeah,
because
have
because
antigen tests.
because in the clinical trials it was based on a nucleic acid test. The positive result, a positive COVID case, was required to have one of a list of symptoms and a positive nucleic acids test. They also did some serological testing, but that wasn't really used to determine whether or not it was a COVID case, because serological assays at the time were pretty rudimentary, not widely used, and not not really robust.
Well, why could a vaccine confound a serological test but not a PCR test?
It didn't confound a serological test.
Okay, well, in the documentation for both the Pfizer and the Moderna trials, we had a different ratio of positives for the people who had COVID. That seems like the definition of confounding, right?
For an antigen test?
Let's take a look here.
Jicky leaks. So here's the thing. Can you show me data that the serological tests somehow were confounded within the vaccinated group? And can you show me data that is because of the vaccine and not because the virus didn't get a chance to?
No, because
So
they didn't do that test.
so
They didn't compare the two. That's the point.
well, they weren't using the antigen test.
If we don't run a comparison test.
Well, we're talking about the PCR test. We don't In the antigen test, if you're testing for the antigen of the virus, then you could have fewer positive results for an N antigen in the vaccinated arm because the virus is getting neutralized before it has a chance to replicate enough to show a positive on an antigen test. But for a nucleic acid test, which is much more sensitive than an antigen test, which is what they used to determine a COVID case in the clinical trials, then you don't have that problem.
Wait, so you're saying that it's because of sensitivity calculations?
It's because, essentially, yes. Do you know the sensitivity of an antigen test versus a nucleic acid test?
Well, there are many dozens of examples I've seen tables for both, but what's your point?
Nucleic acid tests are much more sensitive than antigen tests.
Well, it depends on which test we're looking at. It also depends on the environment. In PCR tests, the numbers that you see, category like that are mentioned, like for a PCR test, those are laboratory conditioned, right? When you take a swab out in the wild, we don't know that has the same sensitivity and specificity. In fact, we know that it doesn't because there could be off-target amplicons.
What? Okay. It doesn't really matter if it's done in a lab versus done on a stick.
You're saying the environment for a PCR test does not change the sensitivity or specificity?
It doesn't change the nature of the test. You can take a sample into a lab and do an antigen test, which is going to give you the same results as essentially an antigen test on a stick. And
So you're saying that
then you can, or you can take that sample and run it with PCR, and you're going to get much more sensitivity.
So your claim is that there is no chance of picking up additional off-target amplicons, regardless of the environment in which a sample is taken.
Can you specify your questions? Because I think you're
An
trying.
off-target amplicon would be another piece of nucleic acid, which has some chance of being swept up in the replication process at some point in the cycle count, and then replicated to a point where it shows up as positive.
And what would need to happen in order for that to happen?
Well, it's sort of a general unknown as to exactly
Not really.
how much of a. I mean, we know that it happens, but we don't know. We don't know anything like a set of criteria.
Yeah, we do.
Ultimately,
So the requirement would be that the primers and probe would have to bind to a specific sequence, and so you know how the qPCR reaction is set up, right?
Sure.
So with what reagents, or with what active materials?
Well, are you asking me to like differentiate between different assays?
What are the three things that a qPCR reaction needs?
I don't know. My
J-
wife designs, and
the nucleic.
I'm not sure why it matters.
So I guess it's not a fair question, but generally what I'm looking for is a forward primer, a reverse primer, and a probe, right? So those three things need to bind specifically to targets, and those targets are nucleic acid sequences. Okay, so in order for the reaction to work, you need the forward, reverse, and the probe to bind in specific places. And that's not going to really happen if on a random off target.
Okay, that's a claim, but that's a claim without a warrant.
No, it's not.
And oh, yes, it is.
No, it's.
You said that this was your rule number 3. Only make claims that we have data for on hand at the time.
Yeah, and qPCR is a very well studied reaction, and we make the primers and probes specific lengths, such that.
Shaking your head, no. She designs these.
Well,
So
the forward,
rule number 3. Only make claims that we have data for on hand at the time.
yeah. So, do you know how likely it is for a forward primer, reverse primer, and a probe to all randomly bind to a non-target place?
No one knows the exact answer to that question.
It's a very small chance.
So no, not according to Pfizer, not according to their data. In their data, and I'll bring this up in a moment. I'll take a moment.
Okay,
to find
sure.
it. In their data, if you cycled up to, I think it was in the high 30s, then 97.3% of the positives were false positives.
No,
Okay, I'll go find that data.
that's not true. Because
According to Pfizer was.
okay, you can show me the data to support that claim, but I think I know what you're getting at. And no, qPCR cycling is normally done above 35 cycles, but it's quantitative. So you're not taking just one measurement at the end of those cycles. And you're not just looking at one result at the end, essentially.
You're not?
No. No, you're looking at the curve, you're looking at how many targets were positive, and you're looking at whether or not it all falls within the range of the assay.
Okay.
But I'm curious to see what you mean by. Oh, so this is not a false positive. Yeah. So this is looking at. I know this figure. This is looking at virus culturability. So this is looking at whether or not you can actually culture virus from the sample. This is the implications of this are mostly in regards to transmission, but it doesn't even really get at that. So you can.
So you're right that it has to do with culturability, but that's the best test of what a true positive is. Culturability
No.
is how sensitivity and specificity are determined by testing companies, right?
No, so what happens in PCR is you're getting a snapshot of whatever's in that sample, right? So in this case, you are testing for the presence of nucleic acid. You're not testing for the presence of a live virus. You're not testing for disease. You're not testing for anything except the presence of the virus. So if you get a result way out at 38 cycles, that most likely means that you're not picking up infectious virus in that sample. However,
Well, right. If you don't have cultural virus, then you're picking up something else, which
No.
is setting off the positive of the PCR.
No, it just means there's not enough virus in there to infect your cells.
But we are talking about positives.
Yes.
This is the ratio from positive signals.
Yes.
So these are from positive tests.
Yes. So
But only 2.7% of them have culturable culturable virus, so you don't call the other 97.3% false positives?
No. So if you fail to get a culturable virus in a yes no test, then that is again a snapshot. If you test 1 day later or 2 days later, and suddenly the cycles are lower, what does that mean?
So there are 4 categories. There's true positive, false positives, true
No.
negatives, false negatives.
No. So
Yes. Yes.
we're not talking about that here.
This is my
So
domain. This is where I do the work.
so here, just answer my question, please.
Okay.
If you test 1 day at cycle 38 and you are calling that a false positive, and then you test 1 or 2 days later and the cycles are now down to 25, what does that mean?
What do you mean the cycles are down to 25? You mean that 25 is where you get to
25 was the cycle threshold for that sample, yeah.
Well, the cycle threshold meaning that's where you started detecting, or that's where you stopped cycling? Because there's a difference between the two.
So it's the cycle threshold is the cycle at which the sample tests positive.
Okay. So
Essentially.
repeat the question again.
So if you 1 day are at cycle 38, you would call that a false positive, yes, because you're not likely to get culturable virus, right?
Well, you might be, you might not be.
So if you test positive at,
positives and false positives.
okay, so if you don't get culturable virus on day 1 and the cycles are at 38, are you calling that a false positive?
Well, if you can't get culturable virus, then yes, I would call that a false positive.
Okay, so then you test 1 or 2 days later, and then the cycles are within the range of 25, and then you're much more likely in the context of these data to get a positive culturable virus. So what does that mean in that situation?
Okay, so sort of a conditional analysis that maybe there were like 3 virions in there that I'm being extreme here obviously, but there was a small number of virions possibly that then grew over the next few days to an infection.
Right.
So that's what you're getting at.
So when you have a positive PCR test, it means that there is virus there. It does not mean that it's picking up some random other thing that is not SARS-CoV-2. It means that there is SARS-CoV-2 there.
Positive PCR test does not mean that there is virus there.
Yes, it does.
No, absolutely not. There are such things as off-target amplicons.
This is
There could be viral fragments, first of all, without virus. You said so yourself a moment ago. But there can be other sequences of DNA that themselves, you got these 18 to 24 base, bookends, and then you don't have to get them exactly perfect. Sometimes something that is not quite matching gets caught up in the process. Maybe it's cycle 18 and then replicates to thousands of replicants.
no. If your primers are well designed and the test is well validated, which this was, then it is very specific to SARS-CoV-2, which this test is.
So your claim is that there are no off-target amplicons with these tests?
There is, within the context of this test and within the parameters determined by the validation of the test, then you are only going to get SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, you're making a claim for which you do not have data on hand.
No, there is plenty of data.
Okay, you don't have data on hand.
I do. It's linked in my videos. Do you want me to link it to you?
Well, show us the data.
Okay.
That there is no way that there's any kind of off-target amplicon. That seems preposterous to me. And I've talked to enough people who, I live in a home with one who make PCR assays, who design PCR assays. I just don't believe that you're going to have data to support that.
Well, this test was validated to only detect SARS-CoV-2. So
how would you possibly validate that it couldn't detect any other nucleic sequence?
you use bioinformatics and you use wet lab work.
Well, I understand the bioinformatics part. You go, okay, we're picking these bookends such that this 18 to 24 base pairs, or however many you pick. Let's say 20. These 20 base pairs, 2 to the 20th power, to the 40th power, whatever you want to call it. Let's just say 2 to the 20th, just in case we want to want to assume some sort of rotational, 1 in 1 million. And so you go through, you look at a catalog, a library, and you say, well, it doesn't match anything else with 2, 3, 4, 5, nucleotides. However, you don't know if your library is complete either. And we are talking about a virus that travels in a swarm with all sorts of other coronaviruses.
Yeah. So
it is very possible that there's homologous transfer between SARS-CoV-2 and those other coronaviruses.
Oh, no. So have you seen this happen in the real world with this test being used for almost 2 years now?
Well, nobody's deciding that, but we have probable cause because they keep using S gene target failure to be a proxy test for each next variant.
It's not just S gene. It's up to
you to prove that there's no homologous transfer in the cloud, right?
So
it's like you're asking me to prove a negative.
So here. So
That homologous transfer doesn't occur.
So look, COVID PCR tests have multiple different targets per test, right? Some tests,
some of them do, and
most
different rules, sure.
All of them.
Three of three.
All of them have more than one. All of them have more than one. It's
Some of them have more than one.
all of them. All the ones that are used and validated have more than one target.
Okay,
It's
the ones used in the trials, I'll agree with that.
Sure. It's either ORF1AB or the spike RBD or the N gene or the E gene. Some combination of those four is usually what people pick to target. And in those tests, the acceptance criteria for a sample is that all targets need to be within the range of the test. So you're not going to get recombination of multiple different targets into something else. And we see this in the real world where if you look at test positivity, percent test positivity for countries that avoided COVID for the most part for the better part of a year, while there was no COVID in that country, you see practically zero test positivity.
Okay, so what page am I looking at to back up your claim?
So if you scroll all the way down to where they tested it against multiple other pathogens, there you go. Not detected, not detected, not detected.
Right, okay, I mean, this is kind of vague here. We have, we don't even know how many coronaviruses are traveling in the quasi-species swarm.
We know how many, we know of it's 4 human coronaviruses.
Well, there are 4 that have been discussed more recently, but like J.J. Couey, for instance, on his stream,
More recently?
He has shown 20 different coronaviruses that were being tested 4 years ago, but are just no longer being tested for. We don't know that they're gone.
Hang on, so four coronaviruses that were discussed recently?
Right, that are part of the usual coronavirus test. The H-CoVs, I can't remember how they're all referred to.
They're...
It's not that there are only 4, it's just that there are 4 that are part of a test.
No, there are 4 main human coronaviruses that commonly cause disease in people.
Can you back that up?
Yeah, that's common knowledge.
No, it's not common knowledge.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's common knowledge to virologists.
Claims that we can have data for on hand.
Yeah,
when I write my article, I will find what those other coronaviruses are, and I'll list them.
You're going to write an article about this?
Of course, it's educational.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, it's 4 human coronaviruses.
Okay.
I mean, again.
Homologous transfer between SARS-CoV-2 and what were the originally accepted genetic sequences of those 4 coronaviruses. There's nothing in this documentation that suggests that you can test for that.
Yeah, you can. You can monitor a population and see if COVID does not enter a population, do you eventually get off-target effects?
And that was done in this test.
You can see it done in real-world data in countries such as Australia or South Korea or Japan. Yes.
You're using this as your exhibit.
Matthew.
You're using this as your exhibit.
Matthew. Do you want to pull up the test positivity rate in Australia real quick?
If you like.
Just go to Google, type in COVID cases.
How read that for us?
I'm on one screen tonight, so my computer's going to be slow. But look, here's another way you can test for this hypothesis you have. If what you're saying would happen, then we would see it in sequencing data. Sequencing data is really widespread. Millions and millions of sequences.
Yeah, given your rules, I assumed that you were going to bring the data. As far as I can tell, you're just making.
Do you not know that millions and millions of sequences have been gathered for SARS-CoV-2?
And now you're just going to talk down to me instead of showing. You know, you were talking about looking at Australian data because you wanted me to see what the positive rates look like, you know, in testing with another country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk us through the process? What statistics do you need to compute the true positive and false positive rate?
Just in general?
You got yourself on mute. I think you did that.
I shouldn't be on mute.
I'll try to unmute you here. Either that or we have technical difficulty, but I think you may have put yourself on something.
I don't know what happened there.
Okay, I can hear you.
Are you asking in general?
Sure. How do you compute the true positive and false positive rates? Negative, false negative rates?
There's a way to do it. I know what the calculations you're talking about are, but I can't explain them offhand.
You can't explain that. You can't explain what data you need.
No, I know exactly.
Feel confident that you can talk about this with us.
No, Matthew, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm not going to try to teach it offhand.
It's pretty simple.
Okay, you can go through it if you like.
Okay, well, I'm going to assume that means that you can't. You're taking the position that you're like an authority, as in you understand what's going on with all this. And I asked for how a simple calculation would be performed, and you're like, I'm not going to do that.
Matthew, it's something that we can look up right now. I know what you're talking about.
Why would you need to look it up?
Because I know the calculation, but I also know it's not as simple as what I'm thinking of right now. So
Well, okay,
it's not.
Why don't I give you the statistics?
I don't know why you're.
Why don't I give you the numbers, and you can tell us what to do with these numbers? Is that reasonable?
No, okay. I think we can. I think I'm trying to ask you, why we haven't seen rampant false positives in populations that did not have large amounts of COVID cases, and why we don't see what you're talking about in sequencing data. I think that's really what's important here, not...
I personally don't believe you know how to read the data. I don't believe that you know how to read and interpret the tests.
What tests? Like what?
To understand what validation is for PCR.
Okay, how do you validate a PCR?
Okay, well, let's talk about sensitivity. So you can tell our audience what sensitivity is. I assume.
You asking me a question?
Sure.
What are you asking?
What's the sensitivity of a test?
It's the how much. Oh God, it's how well the test can detect low amounts of material.
Well, it's not low amounts necessarily. It could be sensitivity could be specified at different levels at different amounts.
Yeah, I know. I know these things have very specific definitions, which I'm not going to rattle off right now or remind myself what they are.
It's the percent chance that a person who is infected tests positive.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it.
Well, it's the definition.
Yeah, I know. I know you're reading off. You're reading off definitions. I know. You're.
I'm not reading off definitions. I don't need to read off definitions.
I know.
I've written a book that includes these computations.
Yeah, I know.
So specificity now
Mm-hmm.
is
How accurate it is. The percent chance that you will actually detect what you're detecting.
no.
That you will actually detect what you're hoping to detect. And not something else.
What you're hoping to detect, and the percent chance you detect. So you're talking about positivity.
And specificity.
Okay.
That you're going to detect something specific and not something off target. See, you're trying to get into these definitions, and it's just not helping the conversation. I would like to know.
I think that it is.
I would like to. I would like to. I would like to know why, if your hypothesis is correct, that you can have all these off-target effects and all this random integration of SARS-CoV. Hang on.
That's not what most biomedical testing does.
Hang on.
Mechanisms are very hard to get to. It's
Hang on,
rare that we
Matthew.
actually know it with perfect
Hang on.
understanding what a mechanism is.
Hang on. I'm not talking about mechanism. If I just want you to tell me,
By the way, you're violating another one of your rules.
I'm trying to make a point here, and you're talking over me, and I'm trying to get you to stop and let me make my point.
I believe you just talked over me, but I'll let you go.
I started asking my question, and then my question interrupted the middle of your sentence. So, anyway, if we have a situation where we do not see any rampant false positives, and we don't see integration of SARS-CoV-2 sequences into other coronaviruses in the mass amounts of sequencing data that we have, then why do you think your hypothesis is still valid?
How do you? So you make the statement that we don't see massive amounts of false positives.
Yeah, we don't.
How do you know? You don't even know how that calculation's done.
Yes, I do, Matthew. You're getting into definitions again.
Okay, we'll continue then. We'll continue with this exercise.
Matthew,
Let's see if we have a population.
Matthew, I can just show you data right now.
You can show me data that says the proportion of false positives.
I can show you the percent test positivity.
That's not the same thing.
Percent.
You can have nearly 100% sensitivity and specificity and still have more false positives than positives.
But we don't have that for COVID.
Well, it depends on the infection rate, right? We have it in some seasons and we don't in others. The false positive rate changes dramatically throughout the pandemic, as it does for almost any kind of a test, right?
No.
The other, in fact, the other variable that we need is the percent infected in order to determine the false positivity rate. Because I'm sure that you will agree, if 0% of people are infected, you have a 100% false positive rate.
How do you determine the percent? How do you determine the number infected?
Okay. Well, it depends on the season and the time. And what we can do sometimes is if we can get the false positive rate, then we can back out what the rate of actual infection was. We can use those two variables and solve an equation. So let's take a look at how this works. So percent infected. Let's see. There are 4% of people infected, and out of a million, how many would that be?
4% of a million. About 40,000.
Okay. Exactly 40,000. Great. So we have 960,000 uninfected, and we have 40,000 infected. And now let's create a hypothetical test. Let's create a test that has sensitivity 99.2% and specificity 99.6%. This is better than most biomedical testing. I know that there are claims of some PCRs that are higher. Again, I believe very strongly that's environment specific. In fact, the CDC agrees with me, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh, dear God.
Let's go ahead and do here. What do you think that the true positive rate is going to be? Do you have a guess
Sorry, for what?
for this test? For this hypothetical test and this hypothetical illness?
If you
Call this
test
illness.
if you test everybody,
Sure, we'll test everybody.
I don't
But it's the same as saying we're going to take one random person from the pool and test them. You know, we'll get the same answer. But sure, we can compute it by testing everybody.
if you test one person, you're not going to get any percent.
Well, the point is to have an expected value. We can do it probabilistically.
Yeah, which you need to determine empirically with a large population. Anyway,
It's the same calculation either way.
you're asking me how many people are going to test positive in this test.
That a person is infected given a positive test. Do you know the base theorem notation?
Yes, I know what you're getting at here.
Okay. So what do we do here?
What do you mean?
Well, let's compute the false positive rate, or the true positive rate.
This
Do you have an intuitive guess before we start? Is it
this means
99%? Is it 90%? 50%? 10%?
this means, are you assuming that the test has 100% specificity here?
No. Like I said, the test has 99.2% sensitivity and 99.6% specificity.
Okay. You can go over this math problem that you've created while I get real world data.
But the point is, I don't think you can read real world data. I don't think that you know how to interpret it.
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, that's what I'm testing for. You have the opportunity to show the audience right here that you understand these relationships. Because listening to you talk, I had every sense that you were just grabbing a phrase to throw into the conversation without understanding the relationship. So I'm giving you that chance to prove me wrong.
Nope, I'm looking at real world data. I just linked it to you now.
How do you check the real world data?
What do you mean by check?
If you don't know how to do these computations, what on earth would you do to test real world data?
So you want to find out how many people are truly positive in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Do you estimate?
I mean, we know how many people are truly positive. That's a given in this particular model.
But in a real world scenario, how do you determine that?
Well, we can discuss this after we have the equation. I'll just show the equation is going to be an identity, and we can move pieces of the identity around to isolate any one that we want, right? So let's just
Again, in a real world scenario, how do you determine how many people are truly positive in order for this equation to be useful in a real world scenario that we're talking about?
If I walk through that, then I will have completed the test for you. I know how that's done. I don't believe that you do. That's the point of this moment right here.
So again, how do you determine how many people are truly positive empirically? Or are you talking about an estimate?
Well, I mean, everything in a sense is an estimate because, even like, where we round the decimal points, that actually matters. But, the point is that if I answer that, then I've solved the problem for you. And I will answer that, but I want you to admit that you can't solve the problem before I answer that.
I want to talk about real world data. I don't want to go through this equation that you've made up.
It's that I've made up.
Yes, because we're talking about real world data, and I don't want to go through hypothetical scenarios on how these equations are theoretically used.
And I've done this before.
Yeah.
I have contracted to perform these calculations. This is actually how sensitivity and specificity are determined by testing companies.
Yes, I understand that, but we are talking about real world scenarios here. You can go through the FDA document on how this test was validated. You can go through the real world data as well. I want to go through the real world data.
Well, the real world data that you just sent, I'll share this now. The real world data that you just sent doesn't go through that.
It goes through percent positivity.
Right, but what does positivity mean unless you know the rate of false positives and true positives?
It's the rate of tests that tested positive under the criteria of the test. So if you're saying that there are lots of false positives, then where are the false positives? During the time when Australia had virtually no COVID, where were all the false positives, even though tens of thousands of PCR tests were being done a day?
Oh, that's an interesting question, because the actual positives that were being reported sometimes were statistically impossible according to the sensitivity and specificity, as in they were like winning the lottery twice over.
Oh, so it's almost like these theoretical things are entirely dependent on the empirical assay that you're using.
Or somebody's fudging the numbers. It's interesting that there's only a couple of places on Earth where that statistical anomaly presents. There and in what's the province in China where they tested 4.7 million people in 48 hours and found 137 positives?
I don't know.
Xinjiang, I think it is. Yeah, that's insane. That never happened. It's just a lie.
So you're going with they're just lying.
Off in the tail, you go, that's a lie.
You're going with they're just lying.
I mean, here's the thing. You've got false positives. That's the reason I'm trying to go through this exercise. This is what he sent me.
How about now? Oh, hey, cool. You guys can hear me. Well, I don't think I'm on my good mic. Damn. That really sucks that... man, my setup is just sucks. Yeah, sorry guys, I moved literally like 2 days ago, and so I don't have my usual setup, but I still wanted to try to do this. So yeah, it's not picking up my good mic right now. Oh my god. Anyway, it was a weird time. He did a lot of ducking and dodging, which was unfortunate. I tried to get him nailed down on one particular thing, but he wouldn't really address the challenges I had posed to him. He just wanted to do these theoretical calculations. Who was this guy? He was one of Steve Kirsch's friends. That's basically all I know about him. Anyway, I'm really sorry that it didn't really turn out well with the audio and everything. Maybe I'll try to get like a full... yeah, he kind of just avoided my question. I tried to ask him how a PCR test would behave differently in a vaccinated versus unvaccinated person, and he just didn't want to answer that. He kept using this term of viral, like, quasi-species cloud. A very odd term. And saying that somehow would make vaccinated people select for different viruses. I knew what he was trying to say, but it's just, there's not enough time for there's not enough time for a virus to do that kind of mutation in a normal acute infection. It needs a chronic infection in order to mutate significantly enough that it would evade the multiple primers and probes in the multiple targets in each PCR test. Yeah, I don't think that he is gonna do another one. He said that I asked him if he wants to talk about vaccine safety sometime, and he said that he doesn't think the conversation would be productive. So, quasi-species cloud, I don't see virologists use that term commonly. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know where he gets that. It's accepted that a single species is going to have many different mutations and several different variants within the population, so... Who is he? I'm not sure what you're asking. Oh, Mathew Crawford. Yeah, that's the he here. Yeah, I can't even get my webcam to just show my face. This is a terrible setup all around. I deeply apologize. Yeah, we can disagree with Paul Offit. He's not anti-vaccine. Anti-vaxxers need to stop pretending that he's on their side. He doesn't think that this vaccine is going to offer significant benefits on top of what we have, and so he thinks it's pointless. So that's fine. That's fine. We just don't have the data to say otherwise yet, and that's fine. All right, well, again, sorry for the bad setup. Next time will be better. Yeah, I don't know if Paul Offit specifically said nobody should take it. I don't think that's what he said. But he doesn't think that it's necessary, is the way I put it. Anyway, again, sorry for the bad setup. Hopefully I'll get a good copy of this conversation to post. Yeah. Have a good night, guys. See ya.